All right, let's dive right into today's topic, intermittent fasting, or IF, as I see it all over the place online.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic these days.
It sure seems to be, and one of our listeners even specifically requested this deep dive, so
Oh, cool.
yeah. So we've gathered some interesting stuff to look at. Got a YouTube video by this Brazilian endocrinologist.
Okay,
Seemed to be like a leading expert in the field.
that's cool.
And then we've got this really comprehensive article from a well-regarded, I think, health and wellness site.
Sounds good.
So, between the two of those, I think we've got, good coverage.
Yeah, that's a good combo, I think.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm pretty excited to dig into this one because there's so much talk about IF and, you see it everywhere from, like fitness people to biohackers. Everyone's talking about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, gets people excited for good reason.
Yeah,
Lots of, big potential implications,
absolutely. And I think that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Is this like a fad diet, or is
Yeah.
this something that's, really tapping into our body's natural rhythms and processes?
Yeah.
So before we get too far into the, the weeds here, let's just make sure we're all on the same page about what IF is.
Sure, yeah. At the most basic level, it's just cycling between, when you're eating and when you're not eating, voluntarily fasting.
Okay.
So it's not about, restricting what you eat, but more when.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are a bunch of different ways to go about this.
Right, yeah. Our sources talk about a few different popular ways. One that comes up is called lean gains.
Okay.
And that one's all about having a 16-hour fasting window if you're a man,
Okay.
and then 14 hours if you're a woman.
Oh, okay, so slightly shorter.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. So you're basically just compressing your eating window each day into a shorter period.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then another one is called eat, stop, eat,
Okay.
which is pretty much what it sounds like. You eat, and then you stop eating for a whole day, basically 24 hours.
A whole 24 hours.
Wow.
Once or twice a week.
Okay. All right, that's pretty hardcore.
Yeah, and then there's the warrior diet.
Okay.
And that one's 20 hours of fasting.
What, 20 hours?
20 hours.
Oh, my God.
And then just a 4-hour eating window.
Wow.
And it's usually focused on one large meal.
Wow, okay. So that's a serious commitment.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I'm getting hungry just thinking about that.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, looking at the sources here, some of the potential benefits that they're talking about are pretty amazing. We're talking weight loss, better cholesterol, blood sugar control.
Yeah.
They even talk about improved brain health. And there's this thing, BDNF, they mentioned. I had to look it up because I was like, what is BDNF? It's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Right, yeah. It's basically fertilizer for your brain, helps it grow new neurons.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's really cool. And the cool thing is that, IROF might actually help increase that, which is, pretty exciting.
Right.
And on top of all that, there's research suggesting it could even reduce inflammation.
Okay.
And potentially, lower your risk of all these chronic diseases that people are dealing with these days.
That's incredible. Before everyone just rushes out to start fasting, we have to talk about the risks.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Both of our sources are very upfront about this.
Mm.
You have to talk to your doctor before you try this, especially if you have any other health conditions going on.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. There are definitely some potential downsides, especially if you don't do it the right way.
Right. So, what kind of things are we talking about here? What should people be aware of?
Well, one thing is, you can lose weight in an unhealthy way if you're not careful, like losing muscle instead of fat.
Oh, okay.
Which is why it's super important to make sure you're getting enough protein during those, eating windows.
Okay.
And you also have to be mindful of getting all the nutrients you need, because if you're not careful about what you're eating during those eating periods, you could end up with some deficiencies.
Right, right. And the article actually brought up something I think is really important, which is, the potential for disordered eating.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you already have a, complicated relationship with food, this might not be the best thing for you to try.
For sure. Yeah. And anytime you're making big changes to your diet, you want to be really thoughtful about it. And ideally have some guidance from, a healthcare professional who can help you figure out if it's right for you.
Right.
And, if it is, how to do it in a way that's safe and, that you can actually stick with.
Right. That you can make it part of your life and not just something you do for a week.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about the different ways to do IF. We've talked about some of the, the risks to be aware of. But what about like the science behind this? Like, how does this actually work in our bodies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, when you fast, your body eventually uses up all its stored glucose, which is sugar, for energy.
Okay.
And then it has to switch gears. So it starts breaking down stored fat for fuel.
Okay.
And that process creates these things called ketones.
Ketones. Okay.
And those are, pretty fascinating in their own right.
So it's like our bodies go from burning sugar to burning fat as their main source of energy.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And these ketones are linked to all sorts of health benefits, like some studies show they can actually improve brain function and reduce inflammation, which we talked about earlier.
Right. And we were just talking about BDNF, which is, so important for making new memories and keeping your brain sharp.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing to think that, IF could actually boost that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder about, like, its potential for helping us stay sharp as we age.
Yeah, definitely.
Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's a really cool area of research. And, this whole shift to fat burning also impacts your insulin levels,
Okay.
which is one of the reasons why IF is often talked about for its potential to improve blood sugar control.
Oh, okay.
But it's also worth noting that, the different types of IF might affect your insulin sensitivity in different ways.
Oh, interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I'm curious about those nuances.
Yeah, for sure. So, let's take lane gains, for example.
Mm-hmm.
With its shorter, more frequent fasting windows, it might lead to more consistent improvements in insulin sensitivity because your body's constantly, cycling between feeding and fasting.
Okay.
But then with the longer fasts, like with Eat, Stop, Eat, you could potentially see more dramatic drops in your insulin levels,
Okay.
which could be great for some people, but it might require a little more, careful monitoring
Right.
to make sure everything's okay.
So it's not just the, length of the fast,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the frequency
Yeah.
and how it fits into your, overall, I guess, metabolic patterns.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another reason why it's so important to get that personalized guidance.
Right.
Because a doctor can help you figure out which type of IF, if any, is going to be the best fit for your specific needs and your, metabolic profile.
Right. Okay, so we've covered, the basics of IF, different approaches, some of the risks.
Mm-hmm.
But the sources kind of go beyond just weight loss. They sort of hint that this could have, even broader implications for our health.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm really intrigued by this concept of autophagy that they talk about.
Yeah, autophagy is really interesting. Basically, it's like your cell's way of, cleaning house, getting rid of all the damaged components, and kind of like recycling themselves.
So it's like our cells are doing their own spring cleaning.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
I love that.
It's pretty
So can you break down a little bit more about how this actually works?
Sure. So imagine your cells have these little recycling centers.
Okay.
They're called lysosomes. And during autophagy, these lysosomes basically engulf the damaged proteins and all the cellular debris, and they break them down into their, basic building blocks, which the cell can then use to create new healthy components.
Wow.
It's like a brilliant system for, maintaining cellular health and keeping everything running smoothly.
So it's like by giving our bodies a break from constantly digesting food,
Yeah.
we're basically allowing them to focus on this internal, repair and cleaning process.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And there's some research that suggests that fasting can actually stimulate this autophagy process even more,
Oh, wow.
which, could play a role in disease prevention and even slowing down the aging process.
Slowing down age. Hold on, this is getting really interesting. Can you tell me more about that, like the connection between IF and longevity?
Yeah, so our sources touch on this a bit. They talk about how IF may be able to reduce what's called oxidative stress,
Okay.
which is a major contributor to aging and a whole bunch of diseases.
Okay.
Like it's kind of like, rusting from the inside out.
Okay.
And IF might help to, mitigate that process a little bit.
And we were talking earlier about BDNF, like the brain growth factor.
Yeah,
Could that also play a role in healthy aging as well?
absolutely. Yeah. Some studies suggest that IF might actually increase BDNF levels,
Okay.
which could potentially help protect our brains against age-related decline and, keep our cognitive function up there.
It's just pretty mind-blowing. I mean, it's pretty amazing to think that something is, as seemingly simple as adjusting when we eat
Right.
could have these profound effects on our brains and bodies.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, right?
Yeah.
It challenges a lot of our traditional thinking about, food and nutrition.
Yeah. Right. Because for so long, the focus has been on what we eat.
Right.
But IF is making people really think about when we eat.
Yeah, and it's not just about, like, living longer.
Yeah.
It's about living better, living healthier.
Right. Exactly.
And our sources talked about that too, like
Yeah.
the potential impact of IF on chronic disease prevention. They mentioned, reducing inflammation, improving insulin sensitivity, maybe even lowering the risk of certain cancers.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable.
It is, and I think it's really important to remember that more research is definitely needed in these areas.
Right.
But the early findings are, definitely promising.
Okay, so before we move on, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
Sure.
So IF could potentially help us lose weight, sharpen our brains, protect against chronic diseases, and even slow down aging. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that's a good overview.
Yeah. But again, it's important to remember this isn't some magic bullet. It's a powerful tool.
Right.
But, like any tool, it needs to be used responsibly and with the right guidance.
Absolutely. And speaking of guidance, I think it's time we talked about, how to actually approach this safely and effectively.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to go next. And that guidance piece is really, really important. IF can be a great tool, but, it's like any tool, you got to use it right.
Right.
That's where a good healthcare professional can be so helpful.
Okay, so we've talked about, the different types of IF, some of the, risks to watch out for. But what about, the actual science? How is this actually working in our bodies?
Yeah, so when you fast, what happens is your body eventually uses up all that stored glucose, the sugar, for energy, and it's got to find a new source.
Okay.
So then it starts breaking down stored fat for fuel.
Okay.
And that process creates these things called ketones. Ketones are super interesting. We could do a whole deep dive just on ketones, maybe sometime.
So it's basically like our bodies go from burning sugar to burning fat as the main fuel source.
Exactly, yeah. And those ketones that get produced, they're linked to all sorts of potential benefits. Like some studies show they can even improve brain function and reduce inflammation.
That's amazing. And we were just talking about BDNF, so important for our brains.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think that IIAF could actually boost that. It makes you think about its potential for, helping us stay sharp as we age,
Yeah, for sure. It's a really fascinating area of research. And, this whole shift to fat burning, it also impacts your insulin levels.
Oh, okay.
Which is one of the reasons why people are so interested in IF for improving blood sugar control.
Right, okay.
But it is worth noting that, the different types of IF that we talked about, they can actually affect your insulin sensitivity in different ways.
Oh, that's interesting. Could you explain that a little more? I'm curious about, those nuances.
Yeah, for sure. So, for example, lean gains, with those shorter, more frequent fasting windows, that approach might actually lead to more consistent improvements in insulin sensitivity
Okay.
because your body's constantly cycling between, feeding and fasting.
Okay.
But then if you look at the longer fasts, like an eat stop eat, you could see, more dramatic drops in insulin levels,
Okay.
which could be a good thing for some people, but it might also need, more monitoring
Okay.
just to make sure things are okay.
So it's not just about how long the fast is, but also how often you do it.
Exactly. And how that fits into your own, metabolic patterns.
Right.
That's another reason why personalized advice from a doctor can be so helpful.
Okay.
Because they can really help you figure out which type, if any, is right for you.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about the basics of IF, the different approaches, some of the risks, but our sources kind of went beyond just weight loss, and they suggested that this could actually have even bigger implications for our health. And I'm really interested in this whole concept of autophagy that they mentioned.
Yeah, autophagy is fascinating. It's basically your cell's way of cleaning house, getting rid of all the junk, and recycling themselves.
So they're doing their own spring cleaning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
It is. It's pretty amazing. Can you break that down a little more, how that works?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
So imagine your cells have these little recycling centers. They're called lysosomes.
Okay.
And during autophagy, these lysosomes basically engulf any damaged proteins and, other cellular garbage that's just hanging around, and then they break it down
Okay.
into the basic building blocks that the cells can reuse.
Oh, wow. So they're really repurposing?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
super efficient. It's this brilliant system for maintaining cellular health, keeping everything running smoothly.
So by giving our bodies a break from digesting food all the time,
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of letting them focus on, these internal, repair and cleanup processes. Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. And some research actually suggests that fasting can actually, stimulate this autophagy process even more,
Yeah.
which could play a role in preventing disease and even, slowing down aging.
Wait, slowing down aging. Hold on, this is getting really interesting. Tell me more about like that connection between IF and longevity.
Yeah, so our sources touch on this a little bit. They talk about how IF may be able to reduce something called oxidative stress,
Okay.
which is a big contributor to aging and a lot of different diseases. It's kind of like rusting from the inside out, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, okay.
And IF might be able to help slow that process down a bit.
And earlier we were talking about BDNF, that brain growth factor.
Yeah.
Could that also have a role in, healthy aging?
Absolutely, yeah. Some studies show that IF might actually increase BDNF levels, which could protect our brains against age-related decline.
Okay.
Keep our thinking sharp.
This is really amazing. It's pretty incredible to think that something as seemingly simple as changing when we eat can have these huge effects
Right.
on our brains and our bodies.
It is. It really challenges a lot of our traditional thinking about food and nutrition because for so long, the focus has been so much on what we eat.
Right, exactly.
But IF is really making people think about when we eat as well.
And it's not even just about living longer. It's about living better, being healthier.
Right, exactly.
Our sources also touched on that, like the impact VIAF could have on, chronic disease prevention, reducing inflammation, maybe even lowering the risk of certain cancers.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable.
It is. I think it's important to remember that more research is definitely needed in these areas.
Right.
But the early findings are really, really promising.
Okay. So before we move on, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right.
Yeah.
So it could potentially help us lose weight, keep our brain sharp, protect us from chronic diseases, and maybe even slow down aging. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview. But again, it's not some, magic solution. It's a powerful tool.
Right.
But like any tool, it needs to be used responsibly and, ideally with guidance.
Right. Absolutely. Speaking of guidance, I think it's time we talk about how to actually approach this safely and effectively.
Yeah, I think that's a great next step.
Okay, so we've talked about all these potential benefits, but where does someone even begin? If you're listening to this and thinking, okay, this sounds pretty cool, but how do I actually do it? What's the first step?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most important thing is to talk to your doctor first.
Okay.
They can, look at your overall health, any medications you're taking, and see if it's even right for you.
Right. Both our sources were pretty clear about that.
Yeah.
This isn't something to just jump into without talking to a professional, especially if you've got any, health issues already.
Exactly. Once you get the okay from your doctor, then you can start looking at the different types of IF and see which one might fit your lifestyle.
Right.
We talked about lean gains, eat, stop, eat, the warrior diet. They each have their own pros and cons.
Right. And it probably takes some experimenting to find what works best for you, too.
Yeah.
Right? Some people might do better starting with shorter fasting windows and, gradually increase the time, while others might be totally fine with, longer fasts right off the bat.
Absolutely. It's all about figuring out what feels right for your body, finding a rhythm that you can actually stick with. And of course, what you eat during those eating windows is super important.
Right. Right. It's not just like a free pass to, eat whatever you want just because you're fasting for part of the day.
Exactly.
The endocrinologist in the video really stressed that, eating a balanced diet is still important.
Yeah, for sure. Making sure you're getting enough fiber, even when you're doing IF, that's crucial.
And, at the end of the day, the goal is to nourish your body,
Yeah.
not, deprive it.
Exactly.
So, okay, let's say you've talked to your doctor, you've picked a type of IF to try, and you're all about healthy eating during your eating windows. What else should people keep in mind?
Well, one thing that both sources mention is hydration.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
It's easy to forget to drink enough water when you're not eating as often, so make sure you're staying hydrated throughout the day.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder. And what about side effects? Are there things that people should watch out for?
Yeah, some common ones, especially when you're first starting out, are things like headaches, maybe some fatigue, feeling a little irritable.
Okay.
Those are usually just temporary, though. They tend to go away as your body adjusts.
But if you're feeling super hungry or exhausted or just not good, Definitely listen to your body, maybe adjust your approach, or even talk to your doctor again, right?
Absolutely. If you shouldn't feel like you're punishing yourself, the whole point is to find a way to improve your health that feels good and that you can actually stick with. It's a journey, not a race.
Right, right. I like that. So, to wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways for our listener who, was so interested in IF?
Well, I think it's safe to say that IF has a ton of potential. Like, it could be a really powerful tool for improving lots of different aspects of health,
Yeah,
from weight management to brain health, maybe even preventing some chronic diseases down the line. But it's important to remember that it's not a quick fix,
right,
and it's not without risks.
right.
So, going into it with a balanced perspective, understanding both the potential benefits and the risks, that's really key.
So talk to your doctor. Find an approach that works for you. Focus on healthy eating, stay hydrated, and most importantly, listen to your body.
All excellent points. And before we wrap up completely, I want to leave our listener with a little something to think about. We've talked about all the potential impacts IF could have on our brain health and lifespan. So, how might this knowledge change the way we think about aging and preventing disease in the future?
That's a great question. It really is something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of IF. We hope you found it helpful. Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.